What I would tell you is that I don't have a lot of good news. And I also want to start by saying that I don't think that we should despair at this fact. But I want to sort of answer this question, which is posed on the flyer here, which is, do these practices amount to a violation of the human right to privacy, and what are their consequences in terms of rule of law and democracy? So what I would say is that the answer to that is clearly a yes. And what are the consequences? We don't need to look significantly further than Germany to understand those consequences. So I'm one of the journalists, so strangely I wear two hats. I work with the Tor project, and as the Tor project I do some software development and some public advocacy, and I train people about security and privacy and anonymity on the internet. At the same time, I also do some freelance investigative journalism. So I'm one of the journalists that revealed with Der Spiegel that Chancellor Angela Merkel was being spied on by the NSA. So that was my story with Marcel Holger and Laura Poitras. And this is, to me, a perfect example about the second part of that question, which is what are the consequences in terms of rule of law and democracy? Look at the fact that we know that the NSA has spied on Merkel potentially since 2002 under alleged SIGINT ruling, this NSRL 2002-388. And what we will see is that if I had done that spying on Merkel, I would be in prison today. Straight up. The general prosecutor, the federal prosecutor of Germany, however, is not sure if they'll open a case about Merkel being spied upon by the NSA. And of course, it goes without saying that the other tens of millions of Germans that are being spied upon, or myself as a resident of Germany, I live in Berlin, there is not even a question about whether or not a case will be opened about our privacy, or Christian Gruthoff's privacy living in Germany. And that, I think, answers the second question. So what is the consequences? That there are two rules. The rules for myself, for Christian Gruthoff, for other people, and the rules for people as they might apply to the NSA. And that is a very serious problem because the rule of law is supposed to be something that is equally applied to all and not merely a matter of class privilege. So that to me is part of the motivation for working on this investigative journalism. So I'm going to take off the Tor hat for a moment and talk a bit about what this means. And I'm going to talk about the architecture of surveillance without being too technical because I was asked very politely to not be too technical. So if you have specific technical questions, I'm more than happy to answer them until I leave in 6 hours. I'll need some coffee, though, if you're going to hold me for that long. But there exists a couple of systems that the NSA runs, and they're not so different than systems that every country in the world would like to build, or at least that some countries in the world have built. So if you look at any embassy, one of the things that we revealed with Chancellor Merkel being spied upon was that the US Embassy had dielectric panels around certain parts of the embassy. And what those are radio transparent walls, meaning it looks like a wall, but if you put surveillance equipment on the other side of the wall does not interfere with receiving radio signals. It's just an easy way to say you have something that looks like a wall, but actually it's part of a big surveillance system. So the way that this system works is it does what's called dragnet collection, or they call it bulk collection, which is just a nice way of saying mass surveillance. What it does is it intercepts all of the radio communications that are in the general vicinity of these receiving devices. Now, these receivers process that data and make it meaningful to the electronic signals filtering systems on the other side of that dielectric panel, on the other side of that wall. There are many programs which I would encourage you to look into. We've written about them extensively in Der Spiegel, but the Turmoil program, the Quantum programs, the Turbine program, the Q-Fire system. These systems show how you can have a single set of sensors in a bunch of buildings around the world, network them together, and then use them for dragnet surveillance, targeted surveillance, and then weaponize them in order to begin to attack people based on the information that you see. So for example, if Christian Gruthoff was targeted by the NSA, he has a specific email address, he has potentially, I believe, a cell phone with a SIM card in it, he has a unique identifier on his cell phone as well as the SIM card itself. And when this dragnet surveillance system observes a signal that includes any of the selectors, which is what you might call an email address, or you might call an IMSI, or an IMEI on a phone, or an email address that just is the domain part of the email address, in fact, then this system will pick that up, look to see what other communications are associated with it, and it will record those. in an automated fashion. And in some cases, in the case of the quantum program, the GCHQ and the NSA together maintain a system which can automatically attack a person's computer system, break into it, and implant a backdoor that will allow them to remotely control this system. And that can happen in an automated fashion. You simply find the selectors that are interesting about a target, and then you can automatically have these systems attack and basically colonize these electronic systems. So if Christian Gruthoff, being the model citizen that he is, has a regular GSM telephone, and he is one of the people that is targeted, I'm not saying he is, but he probably is, then it is the case that in an automated fashion, without any judicial oversight whatsoever, without any other kind of human interaction, once he is tasked, these systems go to work. And any place his cell phone shows up on a cell phone network, any place his computers show up on the internet, all of the associated unique identifiers or selectors will be used as a way to tip the system to begin to attack his computer systems and to try to maintain persistence on those systems. So if any of you do anything politically relevant that is ever not in the interest of the people that control this system, then it is the case that they may task you for selection. And if you believe that you might be exempt, you should ask Chancellor Merkel if she thought that too. It is probably the case that she thought it unthinkable. But she is not the only one that was targeted under NSRL 2002-388. In fact, many other people in Germany are targeted by that NSRL alone, and there are many other NSRLs that are relevant. In fact, the United States government in general and the NSA seems to love targeting democratic institutions of power, specifically because this is surveillance in support of hegemony. It is not in support of counter-terrorism, as they often suggest. It's a mission creep. So the turmoil system is, if you want to think about it in this way, like a big eye. And anything that passes in front of the eye, it is compared against a list of things that are interesting, or a list of patterns and behaviors that are interesting. The quantum system is a suite of families that can do many different things, but generally speaking, attacks the computer systems, telephones, or the people in some sense. GCHQ has a similar thing, but it actually aims to interfere with the people's lives. So for example, what they do with the surveillance system is that they actually interfere with hotel reservations, for example. This is their Royal Valet service, I believe is what they call it. And this is a thing where they see a reservation flow across the internet in the form of an email, and since they are reading the contents of every email for interesting things, they then know to interfere. They know to deploy an asset to the hotel. They know to cancel the reservation so that the person has a hard time checking in. And these are the kinds of petty things that can be done with things that are like the quantum suite, but also, in this case, the Royal Valet. The turbine system is actually the injection. So if turmoil is deep packet inspection, spying on everything, turbine is deep packet injection, which is tampering with everything that seems to be interesting. And the Q-Fire system is a way to tie all of this together in real time in an automated fashion and to ensure that it happens in the fastest possible way. So in some cases, it is the case that other machines which have nothing to do with the National Security Agency or GCHQ are actually repurposed and used as relays for data for either exploit payloads or for other interesting relays of data that are necessary. So home routers which have vulnerabilities built into them that have nothing to do with these intelligence services that are essentially hijacked. The Third Amendment of the United States Bill of Rights suggests that quartering of soldiers not during wartime is basically a tyranny and it should not be allowed. And I would argue that if you repurpose the electronic equipment inside of my home in such a way that that would not be so different than quartering soldiers themselves, especially when used in service of committing what would otherwise be a crime. If I were to do any of these things or to build any of these systems, each one of these systems represents a myriad of felonies, essentially. It's dragnet surveillance, it's tampering with these communication platforms, it's installing software in a... There's almost no difference between this and what we see the Russian business network doing, for example, when they wish to take control of internet banking credentials or to otherwise harm people's computers. So what that means is that selector-based surveillance is kind of the big threat. It's the dragnet surveillance. And what I hope that we showed with Chancellor Merkel being spied upon was how it actually works now. We do not exist in a world of wiretapping anymore. It's not someone with headphones tapping one wire. It's actually whole life surveillance. Everywhere you go, everything you touch, every unique identifier that you have It shows where you've been. It goes into databases. Those databases show geographic information. They show economic ties. They show all sorts of political affiliation, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. That information is pilfered from private companies. It's sometimes coerced from private companies. And strong encryption, anonymous communication systems, and actual integrity in our actual electronic systems are the way to counter it. So the Tor project, which I work on, we build an anonymity system, which I hope that all of you will use. And part of the reason that it exists is that we wanted to ensure that people would have the right to free speech and the ability to read freely. And that's something which we wanted to have as an option. So it wasn't just an abstract idea, it was a real thing. And what we found is that dragnet surveillance is thwarted by this type of technology, specifically because you cannot do selector-based surveillance when the information flowing across these traffic links is encrypted. We encrypt it in a forward secret way, and we do this in such a way that we hope that this means that unless you are being extremely targeted, the dragnet surveillance is really pushed away. The way of doing selector-based surveillance is pushed away. In some cases, when you leave the Tor network, there may be some issues. That is, if they are monitoring exits of the Tor network, when you leave the anonymity network itself, you'll have the same set of problems, which is to say we actually need secure communication systems on top of anonymity systems. So if, for example, you want to use a webmail like Gmail, and at the end of the day, Gmail gives this data up to the NSA, it will not make much of a difference that you have used Tor. We need a holistic picture. Anonymity is just one part of it. But strong encryption where the only people with the keys are the users themselves is a must. And so in this sense, we have committed with the Tor project to never add a backdoor. Because when law enforcement uses our system, if we have a backdoor, we are a target of things like, for example, Mexican drug cartels, Russian business networks, you name it. So we want to build actually secure systems where the users are in control of their own fate and where the systems themselves deliver on the promises that they make, as opposed to falsely advertising, as is the case with many other electronic communication systems. So I hope that that explains a little bit about the architecture of surveillance. I know that that was really a fire hose of information, and hopefully not too technical. I would encourage you to read everything we've written in Der Spiegel in the last 6 months. Most of it is also in English as well as in German. If nothing else, just look at the leaked documents and interpret it as you wish. But a key thing to understand is that people often trot out child pornography, the war on some drugs. Child pornography is, of course, the favorite, but terrorism, it's absolutely a serious problem. And of course, it is, money laundering as well. These things, though, generally speaking, they are not affected. People who are willing to commit crimes are often willing to commit many crimes at once. And it is everyone in this room who is the most impacted by this surveillance technology. It is not the Mexican drug cartels who run their own telephone networks without backdoors. They have no trouble with this. It is Chancellor Merkel and the democratic institutions in Germany that have the most problems with this, right? There's a transitive risk problem. So people will suggest that we must keep our systems weak in order to fight against basically people who would wish to exploit these systems. But this is, I think, quite a serious fallacy. And I hope that Christian will describe how the current internet is completely compromised in a different way and how we can decentralize these systems in order to make them more secure. And I hope that we'll also hear quite a lot about the legal issues, because I do believe that it is extremely illegal. And if I were the one perpetrating these things, I would imagine that I would not be here today. So I hope that that will take place, and thank you very much for having me.